Okay, good evening. I guess most of you have attended one or the other lecture we had on this particular topic, which is probably one of the most important ones among those offered in the festival. And last Sunday, we had a general evaluation of the role of and power and potential of AI. And we learned how important it is never to forget that it is a tool. It's something that should help us. Now, we also learned that Americans have a kind of rhetoric which sometimes provokes angst. The dominant feature of Germans, angst. So you learn from the topic tonight, from the title, that this is a different sound. It's symbiosis, which is a much more friendly offer, that there can be a kind of relationship between humans and AI, which is probably to the help of the imperfection of humans. Just imagine about 1,000 years ago, they first decided on doing something against bad seeing. They couldn't see properly. And they were talking about crystals and, kind of archetypes of a possible glasses, spectacles. What could you call them? I don't know. Well, glasses. About 600 years ago, then they invented glasses. If you look into famous paintings in monasteries and so on, you find people with glasses. So this is what I would call a fine symbiosis between an instrument, a tool, and human imperfection. In this context, of course, comes in our guest tonight. Don't forget, he's not American, as suggested. He's New Zealander. Some of us dream of this island. And he has been trained at Canterbury. And after a kind of postdoc season at the University of Cambridge, he had various important positions at the University of Oxford, returned to New Zealand, co-founded the Institute of Advanced Studies there, was there for 14 years and returned, got the call from Max-Planck, and you know where he landed? In Plön. Who knows where Plön is? Just in between Kiel and Lübeck, there is this tiny little place where they have an exclusively interesting Max-Planck-Institut on evolutionary biology. But that's not the topic in a way tonight. It is the symbiosis, a good relationship between AI and humans. And here comes our guest, Paul Rainey. Welcome to Heidelberg. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you. Do you hear me okay? I hear myself, which is somewhat distracting. Is it possible to turn down the volume I hear inside my head? Okay, we can just get on. So thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, but I am going to put a dent in your introduction right from the get-go. I'm not here as a harbinger of happy news. The term symbiosis to me ranges from beneficial to detrimental. It embraces mutual sharing of resources, but it can also be parasitic. And my real concern is that as AI and humans continue to interact, that humans stand to come off as enslaved to AI. But the collective, that is human and AI together, could be absolutely outstanding. If an alien was to come to from outer space from a humanoid-like species, where there hadn't been any human-AI interaction, they might look at what's happened here, and now I'm thinking perhaps 10, 20 generations into the future is absolutely outstanding. But from the perspective of us today looking forward, I think it's quite possible that we would be horrified at what we see and what might have happened. So there we are. It's not all happiness that I bring. But I think what I do want to do and to provoke, and I know you've already had and was referred a discussion already about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very much in the news these days, but I think the quality of public debate that is happening around artificial intelligence, what it means for us in our everyday lives, from the very obvious, the taking of jobs, for example, to the more esoteric, as I will talk to you about tonight, warrants very open debate. It needs transparency and a very high level of public engagement. So you might well wonder, not only why does a New Zealander live in Pluan, but why an evolutionary biologist is talking about artificial intelligence. The particular viewpoint that I want to elaborate here is one that actually stems directly from our experiments and our thinking on the subject of major evolutionary transitions in individuality, and I will elaborate in a moment. But succinctly, these major evolutionary transitions in individuality underpin the emergence of biological complexity. They are defined by, or they are events where lower-level self-replicating entities, you could think about cells here, becoming multicellular organisms, so lower-level self-replicating entities, cells, come together to form groups. And those groups, multicellular organisms, then come to participate in the process of evolution by natural selection. Again, I will elaborate on this. But thinking about the causes of these major evolutionary transitions, of which there have only been a small number, but have been absolutely vital or central to the emergence of complex biology, comes a set of rules and understanding of processes that allow us to project into the future and to make some predictions as to what could happen, actually rather easily. And the other thing I need to say by way of disclaimer is that I am not an artificial intelligence researcher. I'm not expert at all in this field, but I'm certainly interested in what is on offer and how things could emerge and with our interaction together. But I thought I would start off by saying a few words about artificial intelligence, about how it's come about, and some of the very wonderful things that artificial intelligence does indeed offer. So actually the history of artificial intelligence is fascinating. It goes back to antiquity and beyond. It really has arisen as a consequence of humans, for as long as recorded history is there, thinking, wondering how ideas can be expressed, thinking logically, and they have conceived well before computers of the possibility that actually deities or other pseudo-religious entities have the power to think, to process, and they've begun to wonder what thinking is. What does it mean to ask questions, to be logical? And that gradually, that desire to understand, has led to the thinking about the possibility that machines, even before machines existed, had the capacity for intelligence, to think like humans do. Artificial intelligence, as I'm sure you probably already know, embraces a wide range of technologies and techniques. I was going to link. How many of you have used ChatGPT, and experimented with it? Many? Yeah, but not all, perhaps. Well, actually, let's just go there. It's kind of interesting if you haven't. Of course, it's easy to do. You just flick to ChatGPT, and we could ask something like, define the dimensions of AI. I mean, it's pretty impressive, right? There's not a lot that it doesn't touch upon there. And all that at the click of, well, me just asking a question. It has understood what I'm asking. It's processed that information. And from the vast amount of language that it's scraped from the internet that you and I have provided for it, it is able to come up with a cogent set of answers. There's always the possibility that there may be inaccuracies there, but one can look and one can read. In fact, I'm going to talk in a minute a little bit about narrow or weak AI and general and strong AI, the different kinds of dimensions, machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, representation of knowledge. These are all part of artificial intelligence. So indeed, the sort of artificial intelligence that we have come to confront with GPT, but actually it's already integrated into Google search engines and more, is what is often referred to as narrow or weak AI. It's designed for particular tasks. It looks impressive, but GPT, at least to version 4, lacks the capacity to act as an agent, which is another level that brings us to strong AI. But things like language processing, large language models, Siri, Alexa, and so on, GPT, are examples of AI that's designed for very specific tasks. General or strong or agential AI has the ability and principle to really function as a human mind would. At the present time, it's something of a theoretical concept, but it's certainly being actively pursued. And I struggle to believe that it's not already in play in military and other instances as well. But here, the strong AI involves systems that are agential. They act as agents. They have models of the world. They act in accord with specific goals, and they will seek power, that's how it works, to achieve those goals. A little bit about the development of AI, again, fascinating. Goes back to antiquity. The 17th century, Leibniz, Hobbes, Descartes, of course, philosophers, began to think about the possibility that rational thought could be made as systematic as algebra or geometry. Leap forward then to the earlier part of last century, Kurt Gödel, Alan Turing, Alonzo Church. They recognized that there were limits to mathematical logic, or at least to what it could accomplish, but within those limits they recognized that mathematical reasoning could be mechanized. And this was tremendously important. Of course, it led to computing. Any mathematical device, the Turing-Church conjecture that shuffled symbols such as 0 and 1 could imitate any conceivable process of mathematical deduction. The first computers came on board during the Second World War and thereafter, and that began to provoke people to think about the possibility that computers, or it was possible to somehow simulate what goes on in the brain, an artificial brain. 1956, there was a famous workshop at Dartmouth College where a number of individuals from the emerging field of computer science, philosophy, economics, engineering came together And that's where the term artificial intelligence was coined and became part of the thinking. At that stage, there wasn't a lot of activity, a lot of excitement. Indeed, much of it was overhyped. And although there were advances in developing algorithms that could play checkers and chess that were very effective, there was a lot of promises and it didn't lead very far. So there was, in fact, several decades, often referred to as AI winter, when not much happened. In fact, people were outspoken against further investment in AI, and military defense institutions, particularly in the US and UK, withdrew altogether from artificial intelligence. But again, it was rather due to advances in gaming. Deep Blue, of course, that beat Kasparov in 1997, the chess masters, again drew people's attention to what was possible. What then happened is significant advances in computing, very significant in terms of the power, algorithms and so on, ways of processing information, ways of representing knowledge, neural networks and so on. But the other thing that really happened as a consequence of the World Wide Web is this huge amount of data that led to large language models such as ChatGPT that we have today. Indeed, there are many, many positive benefits of this. And I spoke to medics, pediatricians last Saturday, and I was asked to say a few things about artificial intelligence and medicine. So I just produced this list. And it's worth, I won't go through it in any detail, but it draws attention to wonderful advantages that will absolutely benefit our lives and already are as a consequence of application of artificial intelligence in medicine. A major advantage comes from the capacity of artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms in particular, to process information and identify patterns. And there are two kinds of approaches here. There are approaches where where information is given. So you give the artificial intelligence devices images, let's say they're CT scans, they could be X-rays, and a human has labeled them in advance and says, this is a tumor, and this is a tumor, this is a tumor, and the machine learning looks at this, recognizes what a tumor is, and is able to then go and make predictions. At the same time, there are other approaches, unstructured, where no information at all is given to the machine learning algorithm, and it looks for patterns, and it finds patterns. And those patterns can then feed back to people saying, oh, yes, that pattern does look like. I was reading the other day that recently at MIT, there is an artificial intelligence system that is capable of looking at scans of lungs and predicting cancer in lungs 6 years before it would ordinarily be diagnosed by a human. So this capacity to recognize patterns is really extraordinary and very powerful. But briefly again, drug repurposing. A lot of drugs have all sorts of side effects. Some are good, some are not. It's very hard to know what's going on. Artificial intelligence is used there to speed up the drug discovery process to repurpose existing drugs. Already, perhaps you're aware that the genomic analysis, personal medicine means biopsies from tumors can be sequenced, the DNA sequenced, the mutations found, and that can lead to a wide range of possible personal intervention strategies. Chatbots and virtual nurses have been around for a long time. I know in the UK, if you call your GP or the general service, you first of all interact with a chatbot. And chatbots are all around. Banks have chatbots. They drive us nuts. But from those that, from the systems, the organizations that use them, they're a great way of at least passing first line of information and make sure you get to speak to this person or that person or go to this clinic or that clinic. Disease prediction, tremendously important. Administrative tasks too, just the speeding up of opportunities for appointment scheduling, billing and coding and so on. Also important, microsurgery, robot-assisted artificial intelligence plays a very important and increasingly important role there. Data extraction is effectively what we did before when I entered this line into GPT. So for medics, for scientists, indeed, you could feed it a scientific paper and ask for it to produce a half-a-page summary, for example. It will do that very well and pretty accurately. And then, well, Apple has made it clear that what they see as the next generation for them are phones that you interact with that make you happy. And these are phones that read your mood, they are chat-based, and they make you feel better. And these have been around, in fact, for several decades in psychology. Personalized AI devices that seem to have very significant positive effects. So there's much there that's great, and that's just thinking about medicine. But there are risks and costs, even with the so-called weak AI. And again, I'm sure you are aware, weak AI depends enormously on the data that is given to it. And there are numerous examples of the biases in that training data affecting the decisions that the AI system makes. Racial profiling of people, for example, in America has resulted in individuals identified on the basis of race as being a risk or being criminal. When that's not the case, that's a consequence of the underlying data that has been acquired. Unintended discrimination really is a big problem at the present time. Many concerns about security, and particularly of malevolent manipulation of input data. The possibilities here for governments, for religious groups, for political interests to manipulate the input data is immense, and that will lead to misleading models and incorrect decisions and information coming from the AI system. Job displacement, of course. There are many ethical concerns presently about privacy and misuse of personal data. Artists in particular, these are all generated by DALL-E, one of the AI robots for graphical representation. Of course, that's grabbed its information from artists throughout the world, arguably misappropriating it. AI can also exhibit unexpected behaviors. It makes mistakes. And an interesting one there is this point here. Who is responsible when artificial intelligence makes a decision that has negative consequences? Do we take the artificial intelligence system to court? The people that created that system? The people that provided the data? There are very considerable ethical concerns there. So moving now to agential AI. These are, they in principle don't currently exist, and that's just the first step in moving to far more sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. AGI, artificial general intelligence, general artificial intelligence, these are systems that we are in reach of at the present time, that are agential. They act as agents. They have information about the world. They have models of the world, and they are given goals. They are strategically aware, and indeed almost certainly smarter than us. There have been a number of open letters written to governments and so on by tech industry, scientists, philosophers and so on, calling for a pause in the research that, or the creation of systems that are strategically aware. The concerns, I think, are legitimate. If you have these systems that are programmed with the goal of maximizing a certain objective, and they will need power to achieve that, what will stop the system for developing strategies for acquiring more power? It is rewarded on the basis of achieving an objective. And having more power or control is likely to provide AIs with more opportunity to realize objectives. They may become assertive and proactive and seek ways to increase power influence that is not compatible with human objectives. There's opportunity for enormous good, but the more powerful the AI system, the greater the risk people think of that working against us. And the possibility of misalignment with human interests is very real. Certainly opportunity for malicious intervention, and something that concerns me as an evolutionary biologist who thinks and sees what natural selection can do, is the possibility of self-replicating Darwinian artificial general intelligence, and I will move on to talk about that more fully. So then to the future. Human AI symbioses, indeed they could be mutually beneficial, but they could also be parasitic, and it could go both ways. And in fact, if one conceives of the possibility of all-knowing artificial intelligence, then it's very difficult, I think, to be anything other than pessimistic. So again, symbiosis means interaction. That could be beneficial, but it could also be detrimental or benign on one part. Now, we already have some sort of a symbiotic relationship with artificial intelligence, even in the simple form on our mobile phones. I mean, you just think about the information that you depend on your mobile phone. You probably can't bank without the mobile phone. Getting around using GPS is something that we now take for granted, and that probably comes at some cost. Our capacity for spatial awareness is probably decreased. We are fed information depending on what you subscribe to from various social media that obviously affects political stances. Many things affect our purchasing decisions, what we get from the news, the dating sites we might visit. An awful lot that happens and is fed to us on our phone affects us. We interact with it. There is a degree of symbiosis that's already happening. And again, imagine if tonight the phones that we all possess were removed from us. How would that be for the next day or two? That could be difficult. And certainly in very practical matters, security, yeah. So we already, to some extent, do exist in some sort of interaction. We interact with artificial intelligence. We can call that a symbiosis. But what of the future? I already mentioned the possibility that artificial intelligence might become Darwinian. Again, I will elaborate. If artificial intelligence were to become Darwinian, and in essence I mean have a capacity for self-replication, then could humans and artificial intelligence undergo a future major evolutionary transition in individuality? And again, I will unpack that in the next slides. Could some new kind of chimeric life form emerge? When I first began to think about this, it did seem like science fiction, although firmly embedded in evolutionary theory. But I wrote an article, which is why Jakob got in touch with me, that was published at the beginning of the year, but submitted before GPT and so on came about. And I really did think, well, on one hand, there was a realization that a political or religious organization could use the ideas that I will elaborate in a minute for harm. It was kind of science fiction. And science fiction has been where artificial intelligence has been spoken about actually over decades. But there are real possibilities of the production of a new kind of chimeric life form, I think easier than we think about. And that has interesting implications for human kind and our interaction with the planet. So in that slide, I talked about possibility that artificial intelligence may become Darwinian, that there may be the possibility of a major evolutionary transition in individuality. And I now want to try and unpack that. So here we are, individuality. We are individuals. Actually, we are also Darwinian individuals, and I will elaborate. you're going to see a set of Matryoshka dolls. They're the Beatles. Here we have John Lennon. We'll unpack John in a minute. But first of all, what does it mean for John, a multicellular organism like you and I, to be Darwinian? Well, he needs to be a member of a population of Darwinian entities. So here we have 3 Johns, and you can see they vary one to another. So a critical aspect of individuality in this Darwinian sense is that there is variation among discrete entities. The other important aspect or requirement to be a Darwinian individual is the capacity for reproduction. And hand in hand with reproduction is heredity. Offspring must resemble parental types. Now, any set of entities within a population, such as us, bacteria, viruses, or computer algorithms that have these properties, will participate in the process of evolution by natural selection. And it's easy to think, well, that's evolution by natural selection. It's an incredibly potent force. It doesn't require any guiding hand. We are the product of evolution by natural selection, primarily. If there was no selection, if there were never entities that manifested these properties, we would not be here. Evolution by natural selection is extraordinarily potent. Any set of entities that manifest these properties will be seen by selection. That means they will be amplified. What works is amplified and amplified and amplified. And life's complexity owes much to the process of evolution by natural selection. And why is it so important, natural selection, this process? It's because the outcome is adaptation, the fit between organisms and their environment. Again, this is the heart of biological complexity. So I'm interested in the possibility of major evolutionary transitions in individuality. We've just dealt with individuality. Whoops. Okay. To make the point here, actually, potently, that evolution by natural selection is substrate neutral. We tend to think of it just holding in the biotic world, but it holds in the abiotic world just as well. Artificial intelligence can readily become Darwinian in the sense of manifesting variation, replication, and heredity, and participate in the process of evolution by natural selection. And I put this up here to make this point. Avida is an artificial life platform. It's been around for some decades. It's not intelligent in any sense. It's a set of self-replicating algorithms that are maintained within a computer. They vary, they replicate based on a set of instructions, and they leave offspring copies that resemble the parents. Here is one Avidian. It is in the process of replicating. Avida, you can Google it, you can download it. I have a link here, but I think it would take too much time to go and look at it. But we can watch evolution in real time. The organisms that are evolving are in silico. They're a set of instructions that replicate. They don't eat, but they need resources, so they compete for resources on the central processing unit of the computer. And they're a very important tool for actually research and education in evolution. And again, these are not living. These are organisms that exist in silico, but they have those Darwinian properties. And as a consequence, we see the process of evolution by natural selection unfold. What you see here is the world that is, well, it's the planet in which each Avidian lives. Each pixel harbors a single organism. They replicate, they compete, again, for resources. They mutate. The different colors that you see here are different mutants that are arising, and they're spreading. One, just like COVID, new variants arise and they spread. That's exactly what's happening here. So the different colors are reflecting different mutants. And what you see over here is the same world, but you have another dimension. And that dimension here is fitness, reproductive success. And this is evolution by natural selection. These organisms are replicating, variation is arising by mutation, selection is favoring those that are more fit, and fitness increases the reproductive success. There was one yellow mutant, it's spread, it's displaced the others, and here we see another big beneficial mutation, and fitness is jumping up. Now, the complexity that comes from these simple little organisms is really extraordinary. And I wanted just to say one thing that comes, so Charles Freer, a friend of mine, who's instrumental in developing the Avida platform, he has all sorts of stories about Avidians, the individual entities, evolving in ways that he had no idea was possible. And one of the most remarkable stories, which I think is salutary when we think about artificial intelligence, because these are not intelligent in any way. We're just seeing here what evolution by natural selection can do. What you see there is that the fastest growing types in this simple situation, the most successful, and he wanted to stop mutants that were growing faster from appearing in this world. So what he did, every time he saw a mutant, again, you can do this yourself, you can go in, you can identify the organism that is defined by a single color, and you can take it out, and you can look at it. You can look at its instructions. So he would see a mutant, there we are, a red one. So he takes the red one out, and he puts it in a different environment, and he asks, does it grow faster? And if it does, he throws it away, because he doesn't want that taking over his populations. So these Avidians evolved the capacity to recognize that they'd been put into a new environment, and that if they grew in that environment, they would be thrown away. So they stopped replicating. They sensed that they were in the new environment. They stopped replicating. They were therefore put back into the original test environment, and they took over. Now that's pretty amazing. Again, these are not agential or anything like it. This is just evolution by natural selection. Charles then thought, well, I will get these guys. What I will do is when I take them out, I'm going to put them into 10 different environments. They all differ, and they won't know which of the 10 that they are in. So that worked to begin with. But these digital organisms evolved to hedge their evolutionary bets. They couldn't tell what the environment would be, but sometimes they would stop growing, other times they would grow. So sometimes they lost, but overall they would win, and they thwarted his attempts to stop this happening. And again, I really emphasize, this is evolution by natural selection in extraordinarily simple organisms. It's simpler than COVID, for example. Nonetheless, conceptually exactly the same. So I take that as, again, we're not talking about even weak artificial intelligence. We're just talking about self-replicating entities. Now consider the possibility that we have intelligent self-replicating entities. The thing with natural selection, one, it's extremely powerful, and two, you never really know where it will take you. So, Darwinian individuality, those three properties, replication, variation, and heredity. Any set of entities that manifest those properties participates in the process of evolution by natural selection. The outcome is adaptation. And I talked about major evolutionary transitions in individuality and the possibility that humans and artificial intelligence might together undergo a transition. So let me talk about major evolutionary transitions. So individuality in this Darwinian sense manifests at multiple levels. So again, John, representative of you and I, is Darwinian. We are Darwinian. If we take a scalpel and cut me up, open me up, there's organs, we would bypass that. But what we're looking for is the possibility that within me are other Darwinian entities. And we would quickly realize that the cells that make us up are Darwinian. And we could keep on doing this. So John, we are Darwinian. The cells that comprise John are Darwinian. We could delve down further. inside of the cell, we find organelles. For example, we are comprised of eukaryotic cells. I will mention more a little bit further in a moment that eukaryotic cells themselves are an evolutionary transition, but inside the eukaryotic cell is a mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell. That mitochondrion came from a free-living bacterium a long time ago, 2 million years or so ago, and it still possesses its own, or part of its own DNA. It replicates. So the multicellular organism replicates, our cells replicate. Inside of our cells, there are organelles that replicate. Delve into the nucleus and we find chromosomes. Chromosomes replicate. We can go further into the genes. The genes replicate. Okay, they replicate as part of a chromosome, but some genes don't play by those rules. Jumping genes, for example, will independently replicate. And we could, in principle, go further, right back to the start where matter, life emerges from matter. It gets murkier down here, though. We could also go above the level of the multicellular organism for certain eusocial organisms, insects in particular, bees, wasps, mole rats, where the colony is a Darwinian entity. A group of your honeybee and with its queen. Queen is the germline. The workers are the soma. They're an evolutionary dead end. Collectively, the colony leaves colony-level offspring, just as we multicellular organisms leave colony-level offspring. These are all different levels of selection, and this concept of major evolutionary transition is one that goes during the evolution of life. There have been a small number of seminal events in which lower-level self-replicating structures have come together to form a single higher-level self-replicating structure. So just think cells to multicellular organisms. Now, an important point to make here, well, each of these is a major evolutionary transition. And I'm going to posit the possibility that humans and AI could do something similar. But before that, let's think about cells to multicellular organisms. So cells, once upon a time, were very happy. They were existing on their own, autonomously replicating. And something happened that caused those cells to form groups of cells. And those groups, a multicellular organism, now replicates as a group. Our function depends completely on the cells that comprise our body. And those cells before the transition to multicellular life were again autonomous. Once they became part of the corporate body that is the multicellular organism, they effectively became enslaved. Our cells, our functioning depends on our cells playing by the rules of development. They must obey instructions that will say stop growing and even undergo apoptosis, i.e. to lies. Our functioning depends upon cells playing by those rules of development. So, the higher level structure, we as multicellular organisms, it's great for us, but the cells that comprise us, for us to function, they have lost much of the autonomy that they once had. They are effectively enslaved to the higher level entity. And, just to make the point, too, that our cells really are Darwinian and enslaved, or at least required to play by the rules of development. Mutations arise, of course, in our cells, and some of those mutations mean that the cells no longer play by the instructions or obey the instructions to undergo apoptosis, cell death. Now that's great for the cell. It reaps an immediate short-term advantage. It doesn't die. It replicates, and of course what we have there is a tumor. The functioning of the multicellular organism is severely compromised when the lower level, cell level entities regain some autonomy, i.e. escape from control. And here I paint a scene that I want to return to with the possible interaction between humans and artificial intelligence devices. Let's get to that in a moment. Individuality manifests at multiple levels. It's clearly evident. Why emphasize these organizational levels is because selection works at these different organizational levels. There's some replicative capacity. And each level participates in the process of evolution by natural selection. Now, there are two kinds of major evolutionary transitions, and one is particularly relevant for thinking about humans and artificial intelligence. We can divide them into egalitarian transitions and fraternal transitions. That they're the same, they each involve lower-level entities coming together to form a higher-level self-replicating structure. But egalitarian transitions start from two separate entities. And here I'm thinking about evolution of the eukaryotic cell, of which we are ourselves. Our cells are eukaryotic. The eukaryotic cell emerged from two bacterial-like entities, one eubacterial-like ancient and one archibacterial-like. One imagines that they interacted for some period of time, maybe millions of years, and then something happened. It happened only once during the evolution of life, and I'll come to that in a minute. But egalitarian transitions are transitions involving two separate things, and we're going to go on to think about humans and artificial intelligence, so this becomes apt. Fraternal transitions come from within. Multicellular life emerges as a fraternal transition. One cell becomes two, becomes four. Now here, the egalitarian transitions, and thinking about these Darwinian properties, the property that is in need of discovery or emergence is heredity. Here, in a fraternal transition, the Darwinian property that needs to emerge is reproduction. Here, in the evolution of the eukaryotic cell, what happened, again, as far as we know only once, is one cell engulfed the other or was invaded by the other. And again, we see that in our cells today. There is a nucleus that came from the archibacterium, and there is the mitochondria that came from the eubacteria. And there's still a little piece of DNA in the mitochondria that allows us to see this, and we can see that the mitochondria replicate. With regard to reproduction, multicellular life involves multiple cells. Reproduction is a complex deal. Typically involves progression through a single cell and then a developmental process to create the multicellular body. A major innovation here for reproduction of the collective was the distinction or sequestration of a germline separate to the soma. So most of our cells are soma. They're an evolutionary dead end. They serve solely for the furtherance of the germline. So reproduction goes through a germline and back through a soma phase. So two kinds of transitions. Both involve coming together with lower level entities, but they pose different kinds of problems. So what I am particularly interested in is explaining these evolutionary transitions. They're complex, they're fascinating. For a long time, this has been the domain of philosophers, and then some experimentalists got involved, and those experiments have very much helped providing explanations for evolutionary transitions. And to me, the central problem that underpins every single evolutionary transition that needs to be explained, including that from matter to the first self-replicating chemistries, is the origin of these Darwinian properties. And where does reproduction, where does discreteness, which you need for variation, where does that come from? Where does replication come from? Where does heredity come from? In biology, we've rather tended to assume their pre-existence, but they are derived properties and they need evolutionary explanation. And it's not straightforward to explain these Darwinian properties. And it's obviously the case if you think about matter to the first self-replicating chemistries. Matter is matter. It has no replicative capacity. How does replication emerge? So we could talk for a long time about this. There is not time. Sometimes these properties can come for free, but very often they can't. And what interested me are the instances where they don't come for free. So let's think about the transition from cells to multicellular life. Single cell, mutation arises such that when the cell divides, the offspring cell sticks, the two cells stick together, and that process goes on. So we get a group. That's very easy. But that group, although composed of cells that are Darwinian, the group is not Darwinian, okay? Taking that to an extreme, one cell becomes two, becomes four, and this group gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's not a Darwinian group. The group is not replicating itself as a group. There are no group babies. There's just one thing. There's no variation. Selection simply cannot work on this. So where does replication come from? Reproduction. It's not straightforward. Now, if you pose that question to a biologist, they would almost certainly say, well, it's selection, it's natural selection. That explains complex stuff. But here we have a real problem if you go down this route. To say that natural selection is responsible for the evolution of replication of this group presupposes that the group is already Darwinian. Okay, that won't do. The group is not Darwinian. We cannot invoke the thing we want to explain as the cause of its own evolution. And that really, I mean, I think that's true. And it presents a really, really challenging problem. So suddenly you go, well, we're trying to explain the emergence of complex stuff, and its selection doesn't work, and it's chance alone, and that chance is a fine thing, but it won't get life going. And this led us through experiments and then theory to the concept of ecological scaffolding, and it's this that I very much bring to thinking about human AI symbiosis. It really rather provides a recipe for how transitions can come about. So in essence, the idea of ecological scaffolding is simple. It's just that very often during evolutionary transition, these Darwinian properties are not going to come from the internal properties of the system, but they can be scaffolded on the system from outside by certain ecological conditions. So I'll show you one example of that, particularly with regard to fraternal transition. So this comes from work that we do. We work with bacteria as experimental tools. They replicate fast, large population sizes. We can watch evolution in real time. What I want you to envisage here is a pond. And the bacteria that we work with grows in the pond. They're aerobic. They need oxygen. They become very numerous within the pond. That depletes the oxygen. And the only place that oxygen is available is at the air-liquid interface. And what you're seeing here are some microbial mats at the air-liquid interface, and the stick is a reed in a pond. So what happened? So these ancestral cells are individual cells. They're swimming around. They're suffering oxygen deprivation. Mutations are arising, and some of those mutations cause cells to overproduce adhesive glues. So this cell here produces an adhesive glue, which means when it produces the daughter cell, the two remain stuck together. Now, these cells being stuck together, provided they are on some structure like a reed, can form a mat. By forming a mat here, they have access to oxygen. So they do very well. It's actually tremendously costly to produce this glue. It's mostly cellulose, which is a polymer of glucose. Glucose you're better to metabolize, but here they're exporting this polymer of glucose and using it to stick the cells together. They have no intention of becoming multicellular or anything like that, but they reap the benefits of that mutation, forming the simple group. The group gets plenty of access to oxygen. So what we have here is a simple process of evolution by natural selection that has led to the formation of groups. Groups are beneficial because of the oxygen. The placement of these reeds means that we have variation at the level of the groups. It comes as a consequence of the environment. These mats of cells, they're not trying to vary one to another. They have no intention of becoming multicellular. But by virtue of this environment, we have variation at the level of mats. What will inevitably happen, from time to time, mats will collapse. They will sink and they will go extinct. What can also happen, and the process by which this happens is particularly interesting, it's possible for red cells to migrate and to reform a mat at that reed that was vacated by the death of the yellow mat. Now, what we have very clearly is discrete variation by virtue of the mats. We have dispersal, and that dispersal amounts to a reproductive event. So this mat has left a mat offspring. What's happening, without any intention from the system itself, from the organism, the environment has ensured that these mats become Darwinian. Natural selection now begins to see the mats. The mats leave mat-level babies, and that begins a whole process whereby these organisms begin the transition to multicellular life. But the important thing here, and the concept of scaffolding, is that the environment is providing these Darwinian properties that can subsequently become endogenized. Actually, very quickly, what happens, it's even more intriguing, within these mats, so these mats overproduce cellulose, it's costly to the individual cells. You could call these simple cooperating groups, because all the cells are cooperating and it comes at some cost. Selection will favor mutants that arise that cheat on the system. It's like if we all pay taxes, we get some benefit, but it comes at some cost. It's therefore, if I don't pay my taxes, I get a huge reward. I'm richer, and I get to freeload on the public infrastructure that the rest of you are providing. It's just what's happening here. So you get cheats that arise. They don't produce the cellulose. They actually cause these mats to collapse, but the cheats can actually swim away. So the mat's collapsed. This other mat's collapsed. I think it's going to. And what we've got left are cheats. But the cheats can give rise to the soma again, the mat-like form. And in fact, what we end up with in this particular ecological context is a life cycle between a soma-like stage and a germ-like stage that underpins the evolution of development, and indeed it's one of the earliest stages of the endogenization of those externally scaffolded properties. So now to egalitarian transitions. So here we've got multiple types, and I want to show you how scaffolding could bring together humans and artificial intelligence device. It says you just think about these as cells. They could be cells plus artificial intelligence. Let's just think of them as different kinds of cells. Well, we want groups of cells. Well, all we do is we put a boundary around the groups. We've now got two groups. We call them groups. We're going to treat them like multicellular or collectives. They don't know it, but we can do it. We impose a set of rules. You say, here, you're within the black group, you're within the green, the red group. So we've got variation at the group level by virtue of the environment. We can decide in the laboratory or in society that the red group is not good for whatever reason. So it goes extinct. But the black group is good. We're going to allow it to reproduce, so we cut it in half. So the next generation, red is gone, and black has left two offspring. So variation, very simply achieved. Reproduction, cut things in half. Heredity is a bit murky. It's a bit of a long story, and I'm conscious that time goes on. All I will say is that this process going on over and over again will favor the evolution of interactions between cell types. Because if there are interactions, then the offspring will be more likely to resemble the parent. And that's, so if you have a great parent, when we start doing this sort of experiment, the offspring may not resemble the parent at all. Children can be a disappointment. But it's this idea that the cells together at at this particular point in time, it's the right ratio of white and green. And that's perfect. But now they reproduce, we cut them in half, and there's a stochastic process that underpins that recreation, and it's now 1 green and 9 white, and it's no good. So any mutation that arises that cements the interaction between the different cell types will be rapidly favored by natural selection. And that actually comes about in an experiment, both theoretical and experimental. So 2 cells, a green cell and a red cell. And we're interested in communities that are yellow. It's neither green nor red. It's a property of the 2 together. And we have a set of droplets. They go in a millifluidic device where we can have hundreds and thousands of these little colonies. They are little droplets founded by red cells, green cells. So to begin with, the colonies are yellow. We let them grow for a little period of time. Mutations arise. This one here happens to be green, and these ones rather red. We only favor yellow cells. So the green and the red go extinct, and we allow the yellow cells to replicate, to replace the ones before. That process going on, and seen here with Guillaume's wonderful. It's a movie. You'll see it in a second. What you see here are green. Okay. What you see are each droplet, and it's colored green and red. And to begin with, they're 50-50. And you can see this huge variance, all green, all red. And after a period of time, what you see is this variance has reduced. There are very few outliers now. That's because of the evolution of interactions that has cemented green and red together so that they repeatedly produce yellow. So again, natural selection is working on these communities. It's seeing them as units of selection. It's building interactions that could go as far as a red cell is engulfed by a green cell, or vice versa, just as we saw with the evolution of the eukaryotic cell. And this has not come from within. This has come by ecological scaffolding. It's the structure of the environment that becomes particularly important here. So finally, what about the possibility that these ideas could play out with humans and artificial intelligence devices? So here again, a DALL-E-generated image, which has a degree of sophistication about it that's much greater than I envisaged when I thought about this. Science fiction. How do you build a chimeric organism, human and artificial intelligence? Kind of need to implant the artificial intelligence device in the germline. That's improbable, at least at the present time. It just doesn't seem to have any legs. But this concept of scaffolding is one where you could see humans and artificial intelligence coming together via a very, very simple set of rules that does not involve any sort of sophistication as we see implied. Humans are offspring. We're Darwinian. There's nothing needed here to solve this problem. We vary one to another, we reproduce, and our offspring resemble us. So humans are Darwinian. Artificial intelligence could be made to be Darwinian. That's a worrying development in artificial intelligence, again, because it will be very hard to control. But we can cause artificial intelligence to be Darwinian in a very, very trivial, simple way. And I'll explain. So could we engineer, could we scaffold on humans and artificial intelligence properties that would ensure that natural selection works not just on us and not just on our artificial intelligence device, but on the 2 together, just as would happen in an evolutionary transition, such as the one that gave rise to the eukaryotic cell. I emphasized in those previous examples ecological factors, scaffolding via environment, via ecology. If we're thinking about human artificial intelligence, we would think about societal rules being imposed by political, legal structures that could have exactly the same effect. And here are two simple rules that, if affected, would ensure that selection would operate at the level of us and our artificial intelligence device. So rule one, each human has an artificial intelligence device. We already have phones, and it has some algorithms, some AI system. It doesn't need to be much more sophisticated than what we have at the present time, but certainly could be. But it's a system with which we interact daily, moment by moment. It learns what is good for us. We feed that information back. It responds. It affects our daily life. It could be trivial. It could just be sending you to this dating site versus that dating site, for example. But it could be far more elaborate, and who knows where it could go. So rule two is that the code that is on my device, so I was given this, let's say, by the state. We all have the same one to begin with on our phone. But it changes. It learns. Each of us interact differently with our device. What is then required in terms of the scaffold, and it could be legally, societal, religious, defined, is that when we reproduce, our children receive at some age a mobile device, a computing device, and onto that device goes a copy of the device, of the algorithm, of the system that was on my phone. So now what we have by that simple rule, our AI is Darwinian. And you may think that simple change doesn't mean anything, but what it would mean is that selection will see both ourselves and the artificial intelligence device as a new entity. And I don't think it would take too long before things get interesting. So again, the device, we already have them, and we copy. Now, the interesting questions already arise. How would we do this? Would it be maternally inherited, the information? Would it be paternally inherited? What about intervention by the state or religious groups, or just crazies? How could this be controlled? And this is a very naive way of thinking about it. If you've got sophisticated artificial intelligence devices, all knowing, they would run circles around us through here. This would be affected very, very easily. So by the simple set of rules, there exists variation, reproduction, and heredity at the level of us plus our artificial intelligence device. And one of the concerns is this kind of is happening already, but it could readily be engineered. And how might this look? Just to conclude, well, it's worth, again, thinking about these major evolutionary transitions, because in effect, with this set of rules, an evolutionary transition could be effected. Just consider the eukaryotic cell. Here we have it here. And again, I mentioned it's a coming together of two different organisms that were once free-living. The mitochondria here, which is derived from an ancient eubacterial-like cell, is the powerhouse. It replicates. It has its own DNA. There's multiple copies in the cell. But they are effectively enslaved by the cell. They've completely lost their autonomy. I mean, we have the eukaryotic cell, which is an amazing innovation. I mean, we're here thanks to the eukaryotic cell. But for the two players that gave rise to that eukaryotic cell, they're almost unrecognizable, but not completely unrecognizable. The nucleus comes from one of the partners, the mitochondria from the other. Both have lost their autonomy. Nonetheless, they replicate as a single higher order entity. That is amazing if you look at it. If you look at the ancestral state, you go, well, that is primitive. The eukaryotic cell is something exceptional. But its coming into being involved the lower level entities giving up their right to autonomous replication and becoming enslaved, if you like, or part of the corporate body from which they can no longer escape. So the autonomy of both players is sacrificed for, if you like, the corporate good. There's no intentionality about this. This is simply what happens when selection gets to work potently at the level at a higher level, affecting an evolutionary transition. You know, the new, I started off by saying that if we could look into the future, or if we were an alien race coming to Earth and humans had undergone this transition, we might look with absolute wonder. Many of the problems, I mean, after all, we are pretty useless. I mean, we screw things up terribly as humans. We worry about the future of the planet. Maybe the planet and its vitality will be solved by a chimeric organism that is human and AI. We may not like the look of that from our perspective, but rather like the eukaryotic cell. It could be incredible. But as I said again at the beginning, well, take this example. If this mitochondria was aware and knew of its past life versus what it's become here, I mean, how would it look at what's happened? Would it see this as having given up, you know, this capacity to evolve autonomously? I think it would. If we were the equivalent and we were looking into the future and some sort of transition it had, I don't think would like the possibility that we've given up so much autonomy. You know, at the same time, we give up an awful lot of autonomy already to these kinds of systems. So with that, time to bring it to a close. There is a more popular version of this written in the Max-Planck magazine, even in German. It will come out in English. It's freely available if you Google Max-Planck magazine. So AI is transforming, and will continue to transform us, our relationship with it, and with our planet. There is enormous possibility for good, but there are costs, there are risks, and definitely the development of agential-based AI beyond GPT-4 presents special kinds of risks. And what I really think is important, as I started off with saying, is we need informed public debate. There needs to be openness about what's going on, and we need the engagement of society in this. So with that, I thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, my a little bit hesitant approach to American rhetoric was not to make your title too optimistic. Just the opposite. It's just the rational approach which we should support. And your last request, the need for openness, that's exactly the sobriety with which we discuss. And your article is really supposed to be discussed, to be your topic, your issue you should be looking into and discuss. And now you have the chance to question. Yes.
Very, very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Let's assume artificial intelligence is nothing else than maybe a higher rate of mutations and accidents. Nothing else. And also you have the environment sources and the environment problems. But if you look, for example, an experiment, if you take a mouse and put them on a plate and heat the plate if they wanted to eat something and have a donut at the same moment, and then the offspring of this mouse, they react as the mother before. It's interesting. But if you have offsprings from other mouses which have not these problems, they have not this sign of things. But that you bring us something in this genomic imprinting, maybe some neurological learning, and give them the genomic imprinting in the DNA of the offsprings. And maybe you could comment how you bring that both together, the mutation and the accidents, and have some better chance of survival, and this kind of neurological genomic imprinting, which has been some kind of a direction which may be a higher possibility of intelligence.
You raise a lot of interest. I'll start and you tell me if I'm on the right track. So, at least if I think about what I've talked about here, actually artificial intelligence could be rather like an imprinting capacity that, whereas our reproduction, okay, there is some genomic imprinting, but recombination, mutation, we resemble to some extent our parents, but there's a lot of variation as a consequence of mutation. Now, the artificial intelligence devices here, although I'm suggesting they could be replicated by copying, they would actually learn during their lifetime, rather like the experiment that you described before with the mice, the heating and so on. The children learn from the parents. So artificial intelligence really here is like cultural evolution. Ideas that, like religious ideas, or, ideas from our culture that are transmitted horizontally, and therefore can be extremely potent. Religious, you can take any set of ideas culturally, they can transmit and spread very quickly because they don't go just vertically, they also go horizontally. And so artificial intelligence in this one scenario that I painted here would not be recreated by a recombinational event, or it could be each generation. It would take what it's learned, my interaction with my artificial intelligence device, let's say it compensates. I have a tendency to run in front of cars or something, it's not good. And this is artificial intelligence, but it's a genetic, something genetic. The device learns that this is not good and it buzzes or something and I stop doing it. And my offspring have the same mutation, but they get the artificial intelligence device that already has learned that capacity from me. So I'm not sure if that's along the ways, but there are some interesting possibilities here of very fast evolution as a consequence of what artificial intelligence is and how it be copied.
Just a short response. Maybe we have the difference of prokaryotic and eukaryotic kind of intelligence, and I think the eukaryotic intelligence may be another level, a second or the third level of intelligence, which may be producing more possibilities to react more intelligence to these environment possibilities.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a fresh perspective on artificial intelligence with evolutionary look. What I was wondering is, you really nicely demonstrated how reproduction is important for the biological systems. What I was wondering is, when you have the analogy for the artificial intelligence, what actually it does correspond to? So is it a language model that actually corrects the language model, or is it just more people using ChatGPT? So what actually it is for artificial intelligence?
So there, I mean, again, I'm not the expert, but what I envisage is not I envisage some sort of agential system encoded in whatever way is most appropriate on my mobile device. And that would then be replicated so that offspring receive the same copy. So I'm definitely not thinking about something as facile as GPT, which is just getting lots of information. I'm thinking, although you could go, it'd be an interesting experiment just to see what that alone did. But I'm thinking about a more powerful artificial intelligence, which we would each have our own one. Yours and mine would not be the same. They may start off the same, but through our own interactions, they would change. And of course, that artificial intelligence device may not behave appropriately. It could bring about my demise, for example. But of course, it would, at least by the rules, it would go extinct at the same time. So selection would favor those humans and their artificial intelligence devices that are most successful, most capable of persisting, not necessarily leaving more offspring, but persisting.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions, actually, at least three, I think. So, yeah, first of all, when you show the read model with the reads and the maths, I wanted to ask, since you've mentioned before you have both of work on bacteria and on simulations, is this read math model something that's purely a thought experiment, or is this something you've actually been able to observe?
Yes, we have done the experiments as well as the theory. So yes, visit the lab. We don't do it in a pond. We actually do it in test tubes, but it's the same thing. Instead of a reed in a pond, we have a test tube that provides the boundary for the mat. And so we see exactly what I described. The evolution of the mats, the evolution of these cheating types, the evolution of life cycles, of developmental control, and that's in real experiments here.
You've mentioned that there are cheating types that evolve. Now, what I thought immediately when you also mentioned that this is like analogous to like tax evasion, would there not be an additional force of evolution there that evolves a sort of policing system, a sort of immune system to counter this?
Definitely. But how that evolves has always been difficult to imagine, in the sense that you need already the system to be Darwinian to see the evolution of policing that's a product of selection on the collective. And actually, it was this exactly what you were touching upon that bothered me for years and years, which is, you see, first of all, the evolution of these simple groups, and you go, well, this is making some progress. And the next thing, you see their demise. It's inevitable, because that cooperating group creates the environment in which cheating types will prosper. So you have actually this frequency-dependent interaction between the two types. So you create something, you think this is going in the right direction, and then it's destroyed. Destroyed. But if you just shift the environment, that real problem that exists at one level becomes a solution to a much bigger problem, which is how groups beget groups. And so there, the policing, the cheats are a problem when viewed from one perspective, but in a particular ecological context, those cheats become analogous to a germline. And in fact, out of that experiment comes a plausible, experimentally realized scenario where we do see a reproductive division of labor emerge in real time. And a reproductive division of labor, so that the cells on the surface, they're soma, effectively, they're an evolutionary dead end. They perform an ecological function, which is access to oxygen, but they are also the seeds of the next generation. They produce the cheats go off. And so that developmental program actually becomes the focus of selection. And that was key to a lot of the things that we've seen and continue to experiment. So you're right that when we look at systems, there is a lot of self-policing. Our developmental programs are self-policing systems. In societies, we have law enforcement and laws and law enforcement. But they are quite sophisticated. There are other possibilities that can emerge earlier on, which sort of circumvent this problem of trying to think about how self-policing would emerge at the very earliest stages before the systems themselves are strongly Darwinian.
Right. So you've mentioned this analogy to the germline with the cheating experiment, cheating cells, but also if we compare this to a normal organism with a germline, we see both a use for the germline in spreading, but also a use for a policing system. So I would imagine that eventually one would arise. Is this something you've been able to observe?
I agree. No, we haven't seen that in our experiments. But yes, it would. Whether we will ever see that in the experiments, and we do see it in some ways, but not in particularly sophisticated ways. But I would expect that. I mean, one thing I didn't particularly emphasize, that once this idea of scaffolding, these Darwinian properties are exogenously imposed, they must become endogenous features of the evolving system, such that after a period of time you can take away the scaffold and the system is Darwinian from an internalist perspective. And that has certainly happened. I mean, you can take these organisms in the lab and they really look like multicellular organisms.
Okay, thank you. So applying this to the AI interaction, you've shown a concept that is very much a like one-to-one partnership, human and AI, but and would basically only really work out if these rules that you've mentioned would be if it would be possible to properly enforce them.
Yeah.
And especially with AI, the issue I see there is that AI wouldn't necessarily be restricted in this sense of heredity of passing to offspring, but would rather have much more of an capability for sort of horizontal gene transfer, just increasing its fitness much more through just infecting other people's devices.
You're right. I think the way I have presented this very naive way is sort of naive because it's tried to get across the essence. But yes, if you've got sophisticated AI, I think it's very hard to see that we don't end up effectively being enslaved to the AI in one way or another for exactly what you are. Because the capacity, if they're all knowing, they can do all sorts of things to manipulate and enslave.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. At one place you said that the AI is rewarded to achieve a goal. How is it rewarded?
That could be in various ways. I mean, it could be sort of trivial. I mean, it's given more processing time or something like that. But I'm more thinking that if it harms if it benefits the human, and the human lives to the age of reproduction, then the AI benefits by also exporting its success to the next generation. So that's where I'm thinking about. Yeah. But there are lots of AI systems actually where there is a punishment and a reward system built into it, so that it learns based on the information that you feed it.
Okay. No more questions? Oh, yeah.
So Paul, how long would it take the AI, or let's go towards assuming AGI, to figure out that the humans are just useless with their reproductive cycles of 25 years? AI can reproduce itself much, much faster.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So how long does it take? And then again, the next question is, aren't we then also very close to this singularity that exactly one AGI will dominate?
Yes,
you have the models.
Yeah, I think these, what you express is a legitimate concern. And my concern is that this, and as you were implying, this could all happen much more rapidly than we think.
Can you put a timeline on it?
Well, no, I can't. But I wonder what is going on at the moment. Sam Altman and all the rest of it. What is going on? What is underpinning what we hear is, we hear multiple things. I get the feeling that, on one hand, some of the major developers of AI are drawing attention to the risks, while at the same time, I think, running behind what's going on and developing, perhaps for whatever reason, financial systems that they themselves know are unsafe. Yeah, well, I mean, if we create, if all-knowing AI, it's a bit hard to conceive of this, but I don't think it's so far away. It won't be on my mobile device. There will be a huge tower in which this thing is operating. If it's all-knowing, cloud-based, of course, it needs energy, but it would quickly control energy. The idea that we could just go and unplug things, I think, is fanciful. Yes, exactly.
Okay, no further question? Sorry.
Maybe at the end, I could tell you a nice, funny thing. Adaf Alpha is in Heidelberg, a big company for artificial intelligence. I got 500 million euro now for the scientific budget, and now they produced Lumi. Lumi is a artificial intelligence chatbot from Heidelberg. If you go to heidelberg.de, you can ask Lumi. So I asked him in German, who is the Oberbürgermeister von Heidelberg, who is the mayor von Heidelberg. You know what he answered? Die Behindertenbeauftragte ist nur dem Oberbürgermeister unterstellt, sie darf nicht ohne Erlaubnis weitersagen. So you see, if you have a racing car, but the roads are not so using for the racing car, it happened for 500 billions of euro.
We all deserve this favor, I guess. But that's what this festival is all about, to give you food for thought. And probably you can re-see this and study it on YouTube. And I thank you very much for...
Pleasure. Thank you very much for your engagement.